Welcome back to another podcast episode where we help aspiring developers get jobs and junior developers grow. Today, we're actually going to be reviewing Code Fellows, and it's kind of a unique coding bootcamp. And we're going to talk about why it's unique. But let's jump right into the intros. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Chris Ball. I started out in woodworking and cabinet making, and then I've been doing the engineering side of that industry for about 7 years prior to going to Code Fellows. Company that I was working for ended up closing its doors in November 2018, and so I quickly signed up. I had kind of an intro to building tools by building a software pricing tool, in Excel for my company that I was working with. And it really kind of all the logic of how to calculate square footage and pricing for each element of everything was part of that project. And so that really got my mind looking into what are my options if I want to become a software engineer. And so I kind of had that on the back burner. And then when the company went under, I was able to receive unemployment. And then I was able to go back to school and qualified for unemployment benefits without having to look for work at the same time. So it worked out really nicely. And yeah, Code Fellows for about 5 months. And since then, my unemployment ran out about a week after my schooling. And so I ended up having to get back into work right away. I've got a wife and a son. My son was 7 months old when I started Code Fellows. And so yeah, I am back working in that industry, dove back in as a kitchen designer and an engineer. And then now I'm a senior engineer with another cabinet manufacturing company.
Okay, so, yeah. Cool. Sounds good. When did you graduate Code Fellows?
It was either April or May of 2019.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, welcome, Chris. For me, quick intro, as a software engineer at 3 companies. And then beginning of 2020, I quit my last company to start my own company, helping software engineers and kind of building up content creation channels and coaching, things like that. How about you, Adrian?
So I'm Adrian Easton, and I changed careers from, I spent most of my adult life being a school psychologist. So doing a lot of like IQ testing, processing testing, things like that to find out how students learn best. And then managing a team that helps develop ways to move forward to help the student. And the things I love about that job, I love a lot, but I just haven't been growing how I want to be growing in that field for a very long time. And so I watched I watched my partner go through Code Fellows, and I've actually usually in the past I've described myself as tech phobic, and so it floored me that when they'd be working on things and I'd be talking to them and how much I love talking about code with them. And I realized that one of the reasons I described myself as tech phobic was from having to use programs that were poorly written for my jobs, based on written by people who didn't quite understand my job, and having to find workarounds. So I'm just like, all right, I'll just write code that does actually do the thing it's supposed to do better. So I went to Code Fellows. I went to their evening weekends program so that I can continue working full time. And I graduated from Code Fellows a year ago, this last November, so November 2019. And I currently, this last October, got my first industry job working as a software developer for VersaTackle. In between there, I did work as a TA for Code Fellows and then an assistant teacher. And then I taught an intro class, sort of a preparatory class. And after teaching one round of that, got this VersaTackle job.
Congrats. That's awesome. All right. How about you, Gwen?
Yeah, my name is Gwen Bachthal. I came to software engineering through engineering. I do have a background in mechanical engineering, and I went to University of Texas for my bachelor's and spent many years in mechanical engineering and worked at Boeing for too many of those years. It was great training, and I got to climb the ladder a little bit. So that was cool until it wasn't anymore. I decided to move into software ultimately because mechanical engineering isn't really a growth industry in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm not leaving because I love it here. But it was a little bit stifling. And so although I achieved a lot on paper and it looked like I had like the perfect career, I wasn't enjoying it. And so I decided to ditch and went to Code Fellows in October of 2018 and graduated in March of last year, and went on vacation, got married, came back, did some freelancing, and ended up with a consulting job. I'm fortunate that I have the engineering background because it made it a lot easier, I think, for me to get that first job than a lot of people experience, because my resume just looks a little bit more interesting. But I now work at Solemn Consulting, and I'm learning about all the things that I don't know yet.
Very cool. Well, congrats on the new career. And I like that everyone kind of really, I think people kind of go back and forth whether or not they think that they should stick out their current profession and switch to software engineering. And that's a really hard choice to make. And I'm glad all of you dove into that a little bit and, kind of showed some vulnerability with that, because it's a tough decision. And a lot of people, sometimes they wait too long until they feel like it's too late, or they have a full family to support, and it's much harder to make that transition. But I think everyone actually struggles to make that decision. It's not an easy one. So I'm glad you shared that. All right, let's dive into it. So the reason why I think Code Fellows is pretty unique is because it's modular. A typical coding boot camp, you pretty much have one single curriculum, and it's, from start to finish. And once you finish, then you try to get your position. Where when I was looking into Code Fellows, it looks like you sign up for multiple pieces of each, it's almost like there's like two, it almost reminds me of like college level courses and how they structure it, but it's like 201, 301, or I'm probably getting the numbers wrong, but you move up and you start with fundamental course and move up. And I also saw that the prices gradually increase as well for the more advanced courses, which makes sense. But you had a choice to sign up when it was convenient for you. So can all of you kind of just touch base on like how it actually works? Because it does sound a little bit different than a typical coding boot camp, but am I like pretty close with describing it?
Yeah.
I can take that, Don. So it is modular. There are generally 4 pieces, but each one is a little bit segmented in some weird ways. At the lowest tier, it's the 101 one-day course. They also, I think, have a 105 or something week-long course. The purpose of that one is to kind of draw you in and give you a taste of it and see if you run for the hills or if you dive in and you want to touch every keyboard on the planet. And for me, it was the latter. And I think for Adrian and Chris probably as well. The 201 is a basic curriculum. It's the same that everyone takes, just like 301 is. The 201 curriculum is basically you build a static website. You learn how to build a static website. You learn the basics of building a static website. You learn HTML, CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript. 301, you learn about how to build a backend server and how to deal with a persistence layer. And you build a full non-static website. And you do that over and over and over again. Each of those, the 201 and 301, are 4 weeks each, which is really, really crammed. It's all project-based. 401 is where you can really start to choose your path. 401 is stack-specific, language-specific. So I took the C# .NET Core class, but they also have JavaScript and Python, and they're expanding on that. They have a lot more offerings now. That last one is 10 weeks. And it's, again, a lot of projects. And they also do extra curriculum stuff that I think a lot of boot camps maybe don't, such as data structures and algorithms. Every week you're building out your own implementation of a new data structure and learning the algorithms associated with that data structure. And other things like interviewing skills, things that are specific to tech that seem like they would translate, but they don't really. from other careers. And so it's nice that they build those things on.
Okay.
And I would throw in there that because it's modular, there were several people who started out with my cohort that maybe dropped out because life got in the way, or they dropped out temporarily so that they could come back when things slowed down or it just matched things better. I contemplated when I got to the final class whether I wanted to change from the nighttime program to the daytime program. So it's nice that flexibility is built in.
Mm-hmm.
I think the flexibility is really, really helpful, but there's also a lot of data to show that giving people the option to drop out and only continue when you want to continue, a lot of people don't follow through. Do you feel like some people that did drop out, I don't know, do you feel like some people would have been better off with a curriculum that was start to finish all the way through?
I think I saw the opposite, honestly.
Okay.
What I saw is that the people who decided to take a detour for whatever reason, because they had some commitment that they needed to wait 2 months before taking the next class or whatever, they did come back. From my own experience, they did come back and they did well. And they tend to be planners for the most part. I saw very few people who were stepping in and just saying, hold my beer. I'm going to see what this is about. Because it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of time commitment. There are conversely a lot of people who stayed in that it probably would have benefited them to take a break and practice some of the skills that they got from the current class before moving into the next class. And maybe it was harder for them to get through as a result.
I would say in listening to some of the other podcasts that you've done and researching some other coding schools, the testing to get in, I think, is not as extensive. And so the 201 and 301 are really like a good way for people to kind of get their feet wet and to kind of see if this is something for them. Like I think we had a 50% attrition rate in our 201 and 301 courses. It was pretty significant, but I mean, there were a lot of people that it was just like maybe the speed of the course. I did the daytime course, so it was 8 hours a day. And so maybe they just needed to take it a little bit slower, and the nighttime course gives you a little bit longer thing. So you have more time to work through the material. So, but I thought that it was a good way to kind of help people get a feel for things. And maybe some of that content is what's expected. Like, 'cause I initially was looking into Flatiron and they had a lot of pre-work and a test to get in. And a lot of that same stuff that they expect you to know before you start the actual cohort, I think is some of the stuff that was gone over in 201.
Okay.
I would say that the people that I saw that left with the intention of coming back, most of them did come back. Some people left just feeling, from the first class, feeling overwhelmed by the content. And I don't think that they came back. But then I also wonder, would they have not even signed up in the first place if they were looking at an entire commitment to a program as opposed to being able to try out a lower cost, shorter class? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and that's what it sounds like. Just hearing all of your experiences, I do feel like there's a place for this type of coding bootcamp for sure. And because a lot of people, I mean, instead of having to work out a refund policy that's generous for people that just realize coding's not for them, this is a solution to that. And it's not a bad thing for people just to quit. Because when they do try it out in the earlier classes, that's their opportunity. And I would rather them quit rather than complete the whole coding bootcamp and then decide it's not for them, which a lot of people do. A lot of graduates do, unfortunately. So I like that. You all mentioned 201. It was kind of the starting. Did you mention there was like a 101, like an intro course at all? Okay.
Yeah, there's a 101 that is 1 day long. And then 102 is the class I taught once, which is a week-long class, or 2 weeks if it is, if you're doing the nighttime program. And it's to prep. It's not required. I can't speak to that 100% whether it's required at this point, but it was a prep class to get you familiar with the tools. So getting you familiar with GitHub and a Git flow and the basics of JavaScript, CSS, and HTML.
Okay.
I kind of saw it as a sales pitch. It felt like a sales pitch to me, but they gave you just enough in the 1 day class to kind of hook you, and it worked for me. It's not that you don't learn anything; it's that you go put your hands on a keyboard in 1 day and produce something by the end of the day. But it's not a prerequisite for 201, whereas 201 is for 301 and 301 is for 401.
And I did not take 102 when I went there, and I wish that I had, especially not having much experience in the past. I do feel like I spent a lot of 201 trying to figure out my tools.
Okay. I did take the 102 course, and I was glad that I did. It was actually during that course that I decided to stick with Code Fellows. I was doing it as preparation for Flatiron when I took it. And in conversations with the instructor and other research is when I kind of decided that I was going to stick with CodeFellow.
Okay. So what do you think of the curriculum?
I think the curriculum is fantastic. Compared to other code schools that I've had a lot of conversations with other people from other boot camps, and because I work with several from other boot camps and have friends in my larger circle from other boot camps. And many of the others have what I would consider deficiencies. Specifically, tech interviewing skills are specific to tech. No other industry has the types of interviews, the types of working interviews that tech has. And so if you're not prepared for that, you're at a disadvantage when you're now competing with whoever you're competing with for just getting an interview. Much less actually getting the job from the interview. And the data structures and algorithms work. It was, at this level, I would say it was pretty superficial, but we did actually go through the motions of implementing our own data structures so that we would be forced to understand them at a depth that college students often don't. New CS grads don't understand some of this stuff as well as we have the benefit of understanding it. And so it gives us an advantage in certain ways. And I've heard that other boot camps don't make space for that. Conversely, they don't offer, CodeFellows does not offer an internship option, whereas some like Ada Academy, I know offers, they actually hand you off to one of their partners and they guarantee you that first spot so that you have an opportunity to actually say, I've done some real work at a real company, which is absolutely required to get a job.
Well, okay, so I guess I'll emphasize you don't actually need work to get a real job for sure, but it certainly helps. And I like the internship programs because I actually just made a post about this. I just don't want to discourage anyone because a lot of people coming out of coding boot camps, your experience are your personal projects and they're like very low value on your resume. But for those that are worried about that, well, every job requires 1 to 3 years experience. Just keep in mind, you can create apps, build a user base behind it. And you can also do a little freelance work. Just look on a freelance job board and do something for very cheap. And but a lot of people that go to coding boot camps, they don't really have that opportunity for the internship. A lot of internships are focused on college grads. But you can also, I mean, it's a little harder during COVID right now, but you can reach out to companies online, but just look at a company. If they have a really crappy website or, little to none of something like that to be able to advertise their services, build it for $100. Just offer your services. And, for a restaurant that, might have been in a city for like 5 years, $100 is probably going to be very little to them to be able to just see. It's kind of like when you gamble on a site like Fiverr. Fiverr, what I'll usually do is like I'll reach out to 5 different artists to build a logo, and it's really cheap, and I'm able to do that. And I'm kind of just taking a chance that a lot of companies will take a chance on newer graduates to be able to do something like that. It's a good experience for sure. Just want to throw that out there. I didn't mean to shut that opinion down, Gwen, but I wanted to encourage people, make sure they still have that opportunity. So as far as the curriculum goes, I guess, my thinking is, it sounds like the curriculum is very progressive, and the good thing is a big struggle with coding boot camps is a lot of people have trouble moving to the next step, or, moving from the front end to the back end, or, just understanding the idea of like persistence all of a sudden when you've been building static websites, and you have this opportunity to kind of learn on your own a little bit and like really reinforce the knowledge between the different modular sessions. But do you feel like any of the modulars or any of the classes were too hard? Do you feel like they were overwhelming, even if you got to maybe like a 401 or something like that?
They were all incredibly fast-paced and dense, with a lot of requirements, and a lot of people struggle to keep up. I think it really benefited those of us who took the time to try to teach others. That's a way that I learn. I'm an experiential learner, and one of the best ways to find where your experience ends is to try to teach it to somebody else. You'll quickly find where your roadblocks are. So I think I benefited from helping others in areas that maybe weren't entirely familiar for me, because then we had to go research it together. And but yeah, it was pretty dense and pretty fast paced.
My experience is that most of it felt very difficult to me. But the school has built into their curriculum a lot of talking about growth mindset, which that was my first place hearing about that, which is surprising since I worked as a school psychologist. Now I recommend that all the time to parents. But anyway, so just getting comfortable with, okay, I don't know this now, but I will know this later. Or even though I don't feel like I know, I'm not getting this, instead of panicking about that, just like getting comfortable with that uncomfortable feeling and knowing that 3 weeks down the road, all of a sudden I'm going to realize I know this stuff. And so I spent a lot of the program feeling like I didn't know what was going on, but then realizing I was learning more than I did. And even now, after graduating, when I go revisit something that we were taught, and I think, oh my gosh, I don't remember this. And then once I start poking at it, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm remembering this better than I did. And now I can sort of put it all back together and grow it from there.
Yeah,
but yes, it did feel very hard to me.
You're so right about the growth mindset piece of the curriculum. It made it feel so much more accessible. It made the tech world feel much more accessible. Like when I finished, I did some freelancing, and the first freelance job that I did, the person wanted me to deploy a site on AWS. I'd never touched AWS. I didn't have an account, never been in there at all. But I'm like, I've been on Azure, I can do this. And I went in there and I'm like, oh God, this is all very foreign. What am I going to do? And so I had to struggle my way through it. But Code Fellows helped me learn how to go through that struggle quickly and efficiently.
Yeah. I felt like in 201, there were a lot of us that were kind of just dog paddling, staying afloat. But I felt like this is at the highest end of my comfort zone. And then when we hit 301 about a week in, I was like, this feels like I'm starting to go under. And it was crazy. I remember looking back like 6 weeks into 401 and seeing some of the people coming up through the 301 and thinking, man, I remember what that was like, just to feel like, I don't know if I can handle this, but I agree with the growth mindset. And they just reiterated, you're learning this stuff now. It's all about doing it right now. And 2 weeks from now, you'll realize what you did, basically, and it'll all start to like come together.
They also did a lot of talking about imposter syndrome. So that was also very helpful to use to keep calming yourself down, that no, okay, it's okay that I'm here. It's okay that I'm struggling.
What exactly is the growth mindset?
So growth mindset. So instead of being very focused on, I must get this grade, I must get this affirmation, I must have succeeded at doing exactly what I intended to do, growth mindset is focusing on the process instead of the outcome. So instead of this is hard, I'll never get it, it's this feels hard, but I will get it. Or focusing on wow, look at how much better I know this than I did last month, as opposed to, oh, I just can't do this.
Okay.
So it propels you forward instead and gives you perspective instead of being so focused on, oh, I failed at that thing, therefore I just can't do any of this. I'm going to quit the program. I can't do anything.
Yeah, I really like that. It sounds like trust the process. It sounds very similar to that from my coding bootcamp. I really like that. It sounds like they put a lot of time into building your confidence. That's huge. That really is. Okay. So I want to get like a feel for the total amount of time required for this. You mentioned 401 requires 10 weeks. What does 101, 201, and 301 require?
101 is 1 day. 102 is a week. Those are not required. But 201 and 301 are both 4 weeks each.
Okay.
So 8 total weeks, yeah.
And then if you do the nighttime program, then you just double all of that.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So because the nighttime program is part-time. That's interesting. So that's a long coding boot camp. So you're talking about like 10 weeks for the last one, and that's full-time?
Yep.
It's about double full-time, I would say. I think my average day, and this is weekdays and weekends, it was solid the whole time, was 12 to 14 hours a day, nose to the grindstone. I'll tell you, you only get out of it what you put into it, and I was darn determined to get everything out of it I could.
Yeah,
that's the kind of mindset that I wish more people had. I love that, but that gives me a lot more confidence in this program. I mean, just the amount of weeks. I mean, some coding boot camps will just try to do like 3 months part time and sell the idea that people are going to be ready for a software engineer position, going to be competitive, and they possibly can be if they spent tons of supplemental time with it, but it sounds like Code Fellows really dives deep into this. That's encouraging. I kind of want to pick at two things. We're going to tackle front end and back end. How comfortable do you feel with HTML? Let's just start with HTML and CSS, and specifically CSS. How comfortable are you with that once you get done with all the static site content?
CSS is stupid.
You don't like CSS. Okay.
I'm not fond of front end myself, but mostly because I'm just not visually artistic, I think. And so it doesn't really speak to me. I just don't enjoy the work. I can work my way through it. Like, I understand the logic behind how you make it piece together. And I can do it, but I don't love it. And so I don't practice it.
Okay.
I thought CSS was stupid, and then since I've graduated, I've become friends with it a lot more.
Being in the design sort of world, like I enjoyed some of the CSS. I mean, I like making things look good, but yeah, I mean, it is stupid. I mean, it's frustrating, and I think that like you learn a lot in that amount of time, but like I feel like at the end of 201, I felt fairly comfortable with CSS, just like raw, basic CSS. And I enjoyed it, but then getting into, I delved into a little bit into React after the fact, and like just like not having to deal with all of that is nice.
Yeah, it's very easy to, there are different types of front-end positions. Some will be heavy with CSS. My first one was very heavy, and I got way better at it with my first one. Then second and third, I barely touched it. It was all React, all JavaScript. And you really can't, like, even if you want to focus on front-end, you don't have to focus on CSS. It's something you're going to have to learn, absolutely. But you can hate it and still love your front-end position. But okay, so I might be a little bit of an oddball. Chris, I'm glad you said you liked it a little bit, because I do love CSS, but I do understand why people hate it. It's frustrating.
I love it now.
That's right.
Yeah.
I still don't.
Okay. What do you say, Chris?
I was saying I love what it can do, and that's the part that I enjoy. Like being able to do things that are, exciting, making something look a lot better than just basic HTML was nice. But it is frustrating to try to figure out what does the right thing and why it does it. Yeah.
Okay. Fair.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So Did you learn, it sounds like you guys picked up React. Did you learn it initially, or did you learn it in 401?
Which 401 paths did you guys take? You said C#?
I did JavaScript, and yeah, we learned React in the 401 JavaScript class.
Okay.
Yeah. So I did Python. We did not do React. I did a little Udemy course after the fact.
And how comfortable did you feel with JavaScript at the end of the static content? Did you learn any JavaScript?
Are we talking
before 401?
Before 401? Yeah, 201 and 301 it was HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for 201. And then we dug deeper into JavaScript and Node for 301.
As you move from 201 through 301 into 401, you move front end to back end. The curriculum moves front end to back end. And so in 201, you're almost all HTML, CSS, and JavaScript only to the extent that you're making your static site interactive. So you're dropping in a script. Whereas in 301, you actually build a Node server or Express server and Node. And you spend a lot of time there, and then you're handed like front end packages to feed. And then in 401, it's a lot more just back end infrastructure, cloud technologies, those sorts of things. Framework, yeah.
So you don't learn a front-end framework unless you go down the JavaScript 401 path.
We learned Django, and so there's elements of front-end, obviously, but it's not like React or any JavaScript framework, no.
.NET, there was none.
Okay.
None. We only did enough front end to have something to present from the back end work that we spent all our time on.
That makes sense. This feels like it's back end focused a little bit. Would you agree with that?
This 401 for sure. And
the whole program.
I guess what was your experience in JavaScript? Did you guys focus a lot on React?
For 401, the first half of the class was spent in back end. And then for the second half of the class, most of that was spent on front end with things like React, Redux. And then the final kind of 2 weeks or so was a lot of cramming and interviewing stuff and job search, like really intensive. You're about to graduate. What do you need to pull together?
I think that is where the JavaScript path is a little bit different than the others, in that it does have a little more focus on front end than the rest.
I think you buy that because you're continuing with the language that you've already learned. Whereas if you're moving on to Python or .NET, you have to learn a new language before you can learn the framework that's presented in that class. So you learn C#, you learn Python, and then you move in to the associated frameworks.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And there is a bit of pre-work to learn some of the very basics of that language. But yeah, a lot of the first few weeks is getting familiar with some of the stuff that you already know how to do in JavaScript, but you need to learn it in a new language.
Okay. All right. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you clarifying. So I'm gonna summarize a bit for people that are trying to consider if it's for them. It sounds like it gives you different options for it's a full stack program, but it gives you different stacks to kind of run through. And that's really, really interesting. I like that concept. It also sounds like it's not front end focused. It teaches you enough front end to be able to do a full stack position. But if you really want to focus on front end, it sounds like the JavaScript 401 is the way to go, because you have to learn a framework. It's already extremely competitive at the entry level. If you want a front end position, it's going to be very hard to get that front end position without framework knowledge, and a front end framework knowledge, JavaScript knowledge. You need to be very comfortable with that. So, but every stack is different, and not every stack needs to pick up React or Vue or Angular or anything else like that. So that's really interesting. How comfortable did you feel once you were finally finished with 401? You went through the entire thing. How comfortable were you on the back end?
It's funny. I was convinced I was comfortable until I went off to try to do it on my own. And then I learned that I didn't know anything. I mentioned that I had that first freelancing gig where someone wanted me to build a site. They didn't care about the stack, but they wanted it deployed on AWS. I'm like, okay, cool. I got a stack. I can go build you a website, and I'll figure out AWS when I get there. And I spent a whole lot more time just figuring out how to deploy it using Elastic Beanstalk, no less, which is packaged. But I spent a whole lot more time learning that than building the app. So although I felt like I was comfortable, it was a really quick exposure to the fact that I had a whole lot of blind spots. And so back to the growth mindset, it's just always a matter of just recognizing there's a lot of things I don't know. There's always going to be a lot of things that I don't know, and I need to be prepared to take them on head on when they happen. And so how that comes out in an interview is, I know these things, I've used these things. I know I can learn these other things because ABC. I know how to learn. I know these languages that are familiar. I know these frameworks that are similar. But I don't know this specific thing that you guys use for whatever your product is.
Okay. They both.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that, Gwen. And so when I graduated, I didn't. Well, so different than that, I didn't feel comfortable with backend. I'm more of a front end person right now, but I would like to get more comfortable with backend. Partly that's when things are difficult. I want to make them not difficult. But I do find that when I revisit things, like you were saying, I know where to go to find it. I know how to relearn it or to teach myself more of that. So like in my current job right now, I'm working full stack with JavaScript and Ruby. And so being able to jump into some backend for Ruby, and while it's not the same, but all of those concepts come together.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
I felt like I knew something toward the end, but then very quickly going into interviews and things, I realized how little I knew.
Okay, sounds good. I really like to focus on the data structures and algorithms, and like you said, a lot of people or a lot of coding bootcamps do neglect it, and it hurts people going into the interviews a lot, and that's huge. I like that they focus on that, and the idea, I like learning that specifically by rebuilding the data structure in whatever language, I'm interacting with it and being able to insert and edit data within it. And it's interesting, but I think you kind of need to rebuild that data structure and be able to interact with it easily before you even start worrying about what data structure belongs or is the best solution for the algorithm that you're building out. What do you think of the instructors?
There's a good variety. I'll say that my 101 instructor was one of the primary reasons I decided to go with Code Fellows instead of another one. And she happened to also be my 401 instructor. And she's fantastic. She's awesome. Absolutely fantastic. I would say that all three of my instructors were exceptional. She really set a new bar in my mind. And also we had specifically a data structures and algorithms instructor who I think actually traveled to Vinicio, travel to the other classes as well. He partnered with my instructor, my 401 instructor, to teach specifically DSNA to our class while she was teaching C# and .NET to us. So he would stand in a couple of days a week and force feed us another thing, which is pretty amazing.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of my teachers is somebody who's very heavily involved in the behind the scenes with Code Fellows and was just really fantastic and really just sort of trying to create this space of do whatever you want to do. I want to support you doing that thing. Get in there and break things and make awesome things. And another one of my teachers was somebody that had graduated within the last year from Code Fellows. And I don't think they normally would have put somebody who had so recently graduated into a higher level class, but this person was an incredible teacher. So just he's somebody who had already been dipping his toes into software development for most of his life. And it just had a lot of public speaking experience and connecting people to the material. So that was pretty great. And then a third teacher that I had for my intro class had really good skills, but not good teaching skills. And so I did end up, they have you fill out weekly rating forms to give them feedback. And I was really honest in all of my rating forms. And what was really nice is to see responses in real time to the things that we were putting into those forms. And so it was really clear to see that that teacher was working really hard and that Code Fellows was working really hard with them to get their teaching skills up.
Okay.
So I had the same instructor for 201 and 203, and she was phenomenal. She came from teaching at a college level before she went through the program herself, and then she started as an instructor, and she helped to rewrite some of the curriculum for 201, 301. But she was phenomenal. We were her last 201 and 301 before she moved on and took a job in the market. And so that was cool for us, sad for Code Fellows. And then my 401 instructor, great guy. I feel similar to the way Adrian articulated it. Great guy, obviously skilled programmer. There were some challenges as far as the first few weeks. I felt like I wasn't learning as much as I would have had I gone with one of the other paths. So one of my classmates and I were very seriously considering dropping the Python course and going to the next JavaScript course that was coming up, because John, who's the instructor of JavaScript, is like a phenomenal instructor, and we had heard so many great things from him.
That's who I had for my 401 class, and he's fantastic.
Yeah. And so we very seriously considered that. We didn't, like, part of the reason that I chose Code Fellows is because of Python, because I wasn't able to get Python elsewhere. And so that I decided to stick with it, and it did improve. But that is something that I've often wondered, like, when we were leading up. So as we were going through 301, the instructor that taught the Python course, who was very well respected and had a really good reputation, took a job elsewhere. And so he left, and we didn't know who the instructor was going to be until like a week before or something like that. And so, yeah, it was just, we often wondered, like, what would it have been had this other guy been our instructor? But ultimately, I provided some honest feedback in the same way. And I do feel like it was respected. It was taken well. The instructional staff and everything, like, they really do pay attention to that and try to implement that as much as they can.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, instructors definitely make or break the course. And I think one question I have is, I don't know if you know the backgrounds of the instructors, but do you know if they had coding positions? Were they developers before they became instructors?
My 401 level, I think he was a director of engineering. He had a ton of experience. I don't know how much experience directly with Python. He mostly was a JavaScript guy. Okay. And so I don't know if that played a part. He obviously knew enough Python to teach us what we needed to know. But yeah, that was one of our questions. Was we got little inklings of, how familiar is he with this content specifically versus like how to do it in another language.
I can't speak on this for sure. I don't know for sure, but I think that maybe for the 401 classes, they insist on the teacher being somebody who has been out in the field. I think for the other classes, they prefer it, but don't require it. Again, I don't know that for sure.
Okay.
That's the way it seemed. Like, everybody, at least while I was going there, all of the 401 instructors had experience working for a company for, at least a year, but I think it was multiple years in the field.
My 201 and 401 instructors had pretty significant industry experience. And my 401 instructor was actually working on her CS Masters while she was teaching. And she has now left to go work in industry again. My 301 instructor had a lot of experience, but he did not have a formal CS credential, So he was different from a lot of the instructors, but he's a fantastic instructor, and he absolutely knows what he's doing, and he knows how to code and how to teach and how to just get along with people. So it was, good experience across the board.
Do you feel like your 401, did she have developer experience before, or was she just going through her CS? She did.
Yeah, no, she did have significant experience. She had worked at a couple of companies, including Wizards of the Coast. There was at least one other company that she worked for a significant period of time. And she even brought that into the classroom. She talked about all the, snafus she had in her early days, and how she's going to make sure that we don't stumble in those same ways once we're out, by making us stumble in those same ways while we're still working on the curriculum. So I really, I think we benefited from that experience in those ways.
Okay. All right. That sounds really good. Overall, it sounds like you had a lot of good experiences. It sounds like whoever was teaching Python, a lot of things could have happened there, and he might be very good at what he does now. He might be a better teacher. I'm sure you got a lot of feedback, because I've had an instructor thrown in last minute to teach a lot of things where the previous cohort before mine, they weren't that good, and they had a lot of improvements to make, and they were brand new too. But she was a lot better teaching my cohort. So maybe that Python teacher just needs, to be able to teach a couple courses, and it sounds like he'll pick it up pretty quickly. So it sounds like a good experience overall with the instructors. That's really good to hear. When you actually graduated, how confident were you that you were ready to take on a software engineering role?
Not confident. That's how I felt anyway. I did one interview before I graduated. There was an element of like, you feel confident until you start to realize how much you don't know shortly after that. Like when you start diving into, like, the best way to kind of prepare for those interviews is to start working on things and trying to build new projects, and then diving into something and realizing you have no idea where to start is, it kind of deflates your ego quite a bit right off the gate.
Makes sense. How about you two?
I thought that I was prepared, as prepared as any junior software engineer coming out of a bootcamp was going to be, due to the fact that I had years of engineering experience. So that was definitely a boon for me. And so I was a little bit extra confident there, but I wasn't super confident about actually going and doing the interviews, honestly. Whiteboard interviews just terrified me. Even though we did so many of them at Code Fellows, they still just terrified me, because you just freeze, right? So I decided to take a minute to try to do things on my own first, just to go make sure I knew where my blind spots were before I go present them to the rest of the world. And so I did freelancing specifically for the purpose of making sure that I was shaking out any of the bad stuff before presenting them to employers.
Well, that's bold. A lot of people feel like they're ready for a software engineering position, like a salary position, but not freelancing. They're way too scared for freelancing.
Well, I did freelancing. So what I did is I put it out to my network, and found people who were in my network who needed something done, and just offer my services for free. I'm in the fortunate position that I could do that, right? I could take some time to do that and not have to worry about the income. And so, I did a couple of different jobs during that time, and it taught me a whole lot about what I was likely to encounter when I went and stood in front of a whiteboard the first time.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I did not feel ready for a job coming out of there. So I graduated, like I said, November 2018. And then I spent the next couple of months, through into January, recovering, managing the holidays, and then also struggling with imposter syndrome. And so then I was all ready to dive back in, trying to get out. So I like the social networking part of it. I also I'm kind of weird, but I like interviewing. I like whiteboard challenges. So that part actually sounded exciting to me. So I was all ready to just, go out there and go to every meetup that I could, every hackathon that I could. And then the pandemic hit. And so that just really stopped my momentum for quite a while. It was really sad to have to be like one at a time, taking all of those events off of my calendar as stuff shut down. But then once summer came and I was on summer break from my school psychology job, then I just really spent every single day working hard to build my skills as much as I could.
Okay. You mentioned, I'm just going to poke at it. You mentioned that you love whiteboard interviews. What do you love about them? Like, what mindset do you go into an interview that makes you love them?
So first of all, I am a huge extrovert. So I love interactions with people, even if generally speaking, even if they're difficult. So as a school psychologist, some of my favorite moments in that job have been with some of the most difficult situations, going in and dealing with, an angry parent or a situation that's been messed up and I'm trying to put out the fire from somebody else. I love stuff like that. So I get sort of the same kind of sense of accomplishment and challenge that in a whiteboard interview. I don't know what it's going to be like. I don't know if it's going to go well. I don't know if it's going to be difficult. But and some of this might also come from having a theater background. So in theater, if you make a mistake, you try and turn that mistake around to make the scene better or make it not noticeable. And so I love that challenge of in an interview. Okay, so I don't know the answer to that, or I don't know where I'm going from here, but now we get to have a conversation. And so it's, so I love the interaction of it, whether things are going as smoothly as I would like them to go, or even if it's not. I don't know if that makes sense. But so in a job interview, I love when the energy is such that I can turn it into feeling like a conversation or feeling like we're pair programming together with me doing most of the work.
I wish more people could adopt that mindset. That's incredible. That's powerful. That's maybe that comes from being an extrovert, but also, like you said, being in theater and turning something that a lot of people would feel like a failure and just like they'd freeze because they realized the conversation didn't go like they thought it would, and turning that into something constructive and fun and engaging and energetic.
Yeah, well, and if you make a mistake or you don't know something in an interview, then this becomes an opportunity for them to really get to know how your brain works and, okay, how are you going to handle this? It's not necessarily a bad thing. And I guess that ties in with growth mindset also, that this is not necessarily a failure, that you didn't know something, but now it's an opportunity. And so actually there was at one point where in one of our classes, we were supposed to practice whiteboarding this specific problem. We spent the first half of the class trying to solve it and work on it. And then we were supposed to practice interviewing with it for the second half. And a lot of the people in my class were putting off doing the interview part because they didn't feel like they were comfortable enough with the problem. And I was like, okay, look, we need to get to that part like before class is over. And secondly, you're going to have interviews where you're not going to know how to solve the problem. And so you might as well get practice now having to whiteboard through a problem that you don't fully understand.
I like that. I really like that. What kind of a job search assistance did they give you? Did you have a lot of support from the Koenig Bootcamp while you were searching?
They have some stuff. And they have things that are available to everyone. They have things that are available if you earn them. They have a lot of partnerships with industry. And some of those partnerships produce a couple of jobs at a time, and maybe they'll come in and say, hey, show me your top 3 JavaScript students who are likely to graduate in this time frame. And then they'll gather those people together and invite them in to go talk to the representative. And in order to do that, you have to have demonstrated that you've achieved a level that they would be confident saying, these are our best students right now that meet your criteria. And they also have, I forget what it's called, but they have a program where right at the end, after you've met certain criteria and like jump through certain hoops, you've gotten approval for your resume is in the right spot and all these materials are in the right spot, you can do a final interview with the campus director. And if you pass the interview, then you get moved into this program that allows you more specific access to some of their industry partners.
Is that Career Accelerator? Is that what that's called?
Yeah, that's what it's called. I couldn't remember what it's called, but yeah, that's what it was. But they have more generic assistance before that. Like they are a great network, for instance, but pipelines are still being built around boot camps, right? Hiring pipelines just don't hit boot camps the way that we would like for them to yet. And they're trying to build that up. And I think open access is what they're trying to do, but it's just not there yet.
Yeah, so through the Career Accelerator program, you have to have graduated from the program, and you have to pass an interview with STAR type questions with the campus director, like you were saying. And then they have a Slack channel that regularly posts job openings. They, in theory, have different events throughout the year that, because of the pandemic, haven't been happening the same. But normally, what they would have had are so. For example, I went to a Christmas party that was also a networking event through them as soon as I graduated. But then they also have opportunities where people in that program, they'll maybe set up a day where they go to a certain company, like Microsoft or like Zonar, and bring in maybe 10 students to do practice interviews. And so then they get to see what it's like on at that campus for that company. And then they get to practice interviewing. And then occasionally some of those turn into jobs, stuff like that.
I actually did one of those Microsoft practice interviews. It was great.
Nice. Yeah, I did a practice interview online with Zonar post pandemic or during the pandemic.
Wait, so were the practice interviews part of the accelerator program or okay?
Yeah, so that was after we'd already graduated.
Yep.
So thinking about the accelerator program, it makes sense. Sounds really good. It sounds pretty much just like a coding bootcamp is willing to personally recommend you. And that's why they open up those opportunities. And I completely get that. And I understand some people might be frustrated by it and might even question why they weren't picked. And, that all that's going to happen. But I think that's a really good program to have. And I think that does create incentive to go above and beyond. Because it's not like going above and beyond to benefit the coding bootcamp. It's literally incentive to go do more than what's necessary to benefit yourself. And that's what that kind of program is creating the incentive for. So that's why I agree with it. I really like that.
I think that the only step that you have to do above and beyond everybody else is passing that STAR interview.
Yeah. And I think I don't know if most people do it. I got the impression that most people do it. So it's not like a really elite sort of thing that not very many people get into. It really is open to any graduate who passes that interview with the director. And
even if you don't pass, they give you probably endless options to pass it.
Interesting. Okay. All right. That gives me
they just want to, I believe that they just want to make sure that if they're going to be putting your name out there as somebody that they want to recommend, that you're able to sound competent in an interview.
Right.
And to have had the skills to graduate.
And beyond that, I think a major portion of the curriculum how they sell themselves is that a major portion of the curriculum is interview prep. And so if you've come out of that program without having had ample opportunities to practice both whiteboard interviews and behavioral interviews in the tech world, they consider that not meeting their bar.
That's interesting. So would you say that is their big advertisement is interview prep?
No, I would say that their big advertisement is a holistic experience. Whereas a lot of places might say, they really focus on selling the technical pieces of it. You'll see, if you look at their website, you'll see you're going to learn JavaScript and HTML and CSS, and you're not going to see much more than that. If you look at the Code Fellows curriculum, you see you're going to learn all of these pieces of tech, and also you're going to learn how to do whiteboard interviews, and also you're going to learn how to do a behavioral interview, and also you're going to spend a lot of time just learning how to work with others in tech. Like pair programming is a major piece of the curriculum. So
that's interesting.
I was surprised at the amount of just general interviewing skills and things like that was part of it. So I did not get the impression that was going to be part of it, and it was a pleasant addition.
That was actually. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. You're required to have a LinkedIn profile that has been reviewed by the campus director and approved with feedback. You're required to have a resume that has been reviewed and approved, and they keep that on file and they send that out to their industry partners as well. You're required to go through all of these. There are these assignments that are interview specific, where we would spend a whole day getting dressed up and doing presentations and elevator speeches and all that kind of networking stuff. How to network.
You would do videos and submit those, and they would critique the videos and stuff too. It was good.
And it was required. You can't pass without it.
Right.
Okay. You're muted, Adrian.
Thank you. One of the selling points for me for Code Fellows, besides watching my partner go through it, is the fact that I wanted a program that would funnel me as best as possible into a new job. And so because of the focus on those interview skills, what you need to do to actually practically get out there and get a job, and then also all of the connections that come with going to an actual school as opposed to, say, just teaching myself online. I wanted all of those connections. So things like the Career Accelerator program, things like the opportunity to stay connected by continuing to TA. A lot of people, or the class that I ended up teaching, the 102 class, everyone I saw who taught the 102 class for the evening program ended up pretty immediately getting a job in the industry. So just, being able to keep immersed even after you've graduated, I wanted all of those kinds of opportunities.
I will say, when I was considering Flatiron and I chose Code Fellows, part of the reason was because of the connections. It was Flatiron's first cohort in Seattle, and I was a little bit concerned about being a guinea pig and not having the same connections and the job placement opportunities. So that was one of my motivations.
Another piece that Code Fellows does for connection is once a week or so, or less, give or take. Once a week, they'll have a partner power hour where they have somebody come in and give a lunchtime talk, where they'll be talking about what it was like to transition from their career into the software industry, or what it's like being a developer advocate, or just different things. And so not only do you get to learn about a topic or hear somebody else's experiences, but then you get an opportunity to connect with somebody. So somebody who comes into the program and has no connections in the tech industry can leave there with a new connection on LinkedIn every single week if they wanted to.
And you were required to attend that and write up a little report about what you learned through that too. Which, I don't know if were you guys there when the lady came and talked about Kubernetes and containers? And I was in 301 and nobody had any idea what she was talking about. It was hilarious.
That happens.
Okay. If you had to, so it definitely sounds like they put a lot of emphasis on you being a resourceful developer, you being a resourceful person throughout the job search, and they're preparing you for that. And a lot of coding boot camps neglect that part of it. They just teach the coding. And so this is really interesting to hear this. I'm actually going to, I always have trouble with this. So I'm going to ask all of you, if you had to name the title of this YouTube video or podcast episode to best reflect Code Fellows, what would it be? So everything that you just said is pretty much what it represents. How do you condense that down? How would you? I'm so glad that you are taking time to think, because I struggle with this and I always wondered if I'm just bad at this.
This is hard, Don. It's not an easy thing to do. It's also why I don't like front end.
Fair enough. Okay.
I would call it something with holistic experience somewhere in there, because that's the thing that I really took out of it. When I'm comparing to other curricula or other schools that I've heard about, the thing that I always come away with is I got so much more than just coding and technical stuff out of it. So I would say something about a holistic experience is the right answer for me.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know the right term, but like, to me, what I think of is like, it was a lot of deep dives. Like, it wasn't just like surface level on everything. It was like deep dives into a lot of things, but not like, I didn't come away with like I understand everything, but I did come away with the tools and enough exposure to where I could dive back in and kind of understand some things. And again, that's not a concise little packet for you, but.
It's like allergy desensitization treatment.
I've done that twice. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. It's pretty great. I would fully agree with both of those things that were already said, and then I would throw in the whole pipeline idea that I talked about earlier of being able to change your life or career with this straight line into this new opportunity.
Okay. All right. Well, I really appreciate you. I mean, that's my job to come up with that. So I appreciate your help. I really do. So, okay. I think we went over most of what I wanted to cover, and I've summarized at different points what I think of it. But everyone here, like all of you, did a really good job of diving into the parts that you really noticed and that really caught your attention and made you proud to go through the coding bootcamp and feel confident with it. And that's, the goal of this podcast. Now, with everything that we've talked about, let's dive into the constructive criticism that you would have for the coding bootcamp. What feedback would you have to make it better, to improve it?
I think Chris talked early on about the early filtration. Like they don't maybe put as much emphasis on pre-work and entrance exam as I think would be more helpful for people, because a lot of people get in there that maybe don't really recognize what they're getting themselves into, and then they struggle real hard. And it's super uncomfortable for them. And I think that their success and their outcomes might be better if they were made more prepared for the program ahead of time.
And they've already paid the $2,500, which would be nice if there was a little bit of that ahead of time.
Yeah, so there is pre-work and there is an exam. And I think some of us really took it seriously and dug into it and felt very obligated to learn it and do it well. A lot of people did not. And the big critique I would have for Code Fellows on that is accountability probably could be a little bit higher. Like they need to impose more accountability on people for doing their part. Because again, the program, you get out of it what you put into it and nothing more.
How much was the program total?
My cohort was actually on like a 50% off offer. And so I think the total was something around 10 or 12,000.
I paid 20.
I got a diversity scholarship for being female, because the diversity scholarship is there to bridge the gap for underrepresented groups in tech. So that took 30% off of the tuition. It could have been more if for somebody else, but 30% was, I believe, the minimum that they take off for that scholarship.
Okay. Interesting.
And mine was the same as Chris said. So it would have been 20,000, but then 30% off of that.
Yeah, it's 2,500, then 3,500, and then 12,000. That's the breakdown, I think. I think that's right. 25, or it was at 3,500, then 4,500. That's what it was. 3,500, 4,500, 12,000.
And so I sort of I struggle with the idea of like, I do feel like they could have more of a process for applying. And at the same time, I also really appreciate the opportunity that they give to anybody to be able to try it out for that one class. And so I see pros and cons to both of those things. I feel like allowing anyone to sign up for that first class at least is a way to sort of start to filter. But yeah, I don't know which is better, but I do think they get a lot of opportunity for people to try it out that might not normally get in under a really stringent application process. But then you do end up with people in that first class that it's not where they're wanting to be or should be.
But and maybe that gatekeeper should be after the first class. You know, maybe there should be more pre-work going into 201, where 101 is the exposure to see if it's for you.
And I did have pre-work going into my 201 class. So for 201, we had to do work on Khan Academy for some basics for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
And 201 is the first required course too. So, yeah.
There was a lot of pre-work that was required, and it took me a good amount of time to get through it all. And it was also Git. There was a computer set up and a dev environment set up and all sorts of things that a lot of people just didn't do. And that's where I saw the lack of accountability. And then moving on to the next class, it felt like there were people who showed up in 301 who maybe should have spent a little bit more time revisiting the 201 curriculum first.
Which is one of the benefits that people can. And I think the second time you take it, there is a discount. But people can, if they need to go through those 4 weeks again, they can, and then move up. So that
I have seen people do that, and there's no shame in that. So people will take a class and then have to take it again, and it's half off.
Well, do you still have access to the materials where you can just go over them on your own?
Honestly, you have access to the materials. A lot of the stuff that that we saw is available on the public GitHub repositories. They run the class through public GitHub repositories.
Wow. Okay. That's a bonus tip for anyone that wants to revisit that material. That's interesting. I agree with you. I think, especially when you get into the harder classes, I think it'd be really helpful to have even an interview, even a technical interview, or, you know, some people, what a lot of coding boot camps will do is they'll have like checkpoints where you need to build something, and they'll have all the tests pre-built out to be able to test that what you're building actually works to the requirements, to the instructions. And if they put a little time into that, they could automate it. It would save them time, you know, if they don't have time for instructors to interview students coming into even 201, 301, 401. Maybe that's an option. So
to move forward to the next class through 201, 301, 401, not everyone gets to move forward. So you do have to have passed the class before that, which I believe is maybe at 80% or higher, or 90%. 90%. It's the exam that is at 80%. So you have to pass an entrance exam into the next class at 80%. You have to have passed the class before that at 90%. And you do need to get approval from the instructor that you just had. So I did see that as a student who was in my cohort for a chunk of it, did get asked to not move forward. I don't know what their grades were, but it had more to do with incompatibility of view of future goals. So it's not just a given that you will move forward to the next class.
And if you're not meeting that bar, though, they'll counsel you ahead of time. It's not like you get surprised by that. Along the way, if you're not quite hitting the mark, they'll try to help you get up there.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. Let's do our outros. Chris, if people wanted to reach you, where could they reach you?
LinkedIn is probably the best place. It's just LinkedIn/ball, like a baseball.
Perfect. And for me, I'm just going to say we're going to continue producing this on Buzzsprout and YouTube. Definitely, if you like this kind of episode, leave comments, like the video. It helps boost my video in the algorithm. Like I keep saying, every single Podcast, I'm probably about like 14 days, maybe a little less than 2 weeks of getting partnered on YouTube. So thank you so much for all the support. Really appreciate that. But yeah, we're going to keep doing the Coding Bootcamp episodes. And just reach out to me, leave a comment. I think on YouTube, you can actually see my email address if you want to personally reach out to me. But Adrian, where could they reach you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Adrian Easton. I'm easy to find there. I'm also on Twitter. I think it's that Adrian. I'm not on there as much as I'd like to be, but I'd like to get more active on there. But yeah, LinkedIn is best.
Okay. How about you, Gwen?
LinkedIn is best. It's Gwen Buckthall. I've got several GitHub accounts too. So if you want to follow Gwenny B, that's a good one to start with.
Sounds good. All right. Well, everyone, thanks for watching. Really appreciate your support. That's pretty much the wrap of the episode. And then we're going to do another Coding Bootcamp episode coming up. I think that's the order of the episodes. But thanks for watching. Continue liking, commenting, and subscribing. All of it helps grow the very small podcast we have. It's starting to finally grow a little bit. So really appreciate the support. Chris, Adrian, Gwen, thank you so much for hopping on and sharing your experiences.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Don.
Everything.